Chapter 2. What People Thought of the Idea. I do not wish you to think that Columbus was the first man to say that the earth was round, or the first to sail to the west over the Atlantic Ocean. He was not. Other men had said that they believed the earth was round. Other men had sailed out into the Atlantic Ocean. But no sailor who believed the earth was round had ever yet tried to prove that it was by crossing the Atlantic. So you see, Columbus was really the first man to say, "I believe the earth is round, and I will show you that it is by sailing to the lands that are on the other side of the earth." He even figured out how far it was around the world. Your geography, tells you now that what is called the circumference of the earth, that is, a straight line drawn right around it, is nearly 25,000 miles. Columbus had figured it up pretty carefully, and he thought it was about 20,000 miles. If I could start from Genoa, he said, and walk straight ahead until I got back to Genoa again, I should walk about 20,000 miles. Cathay, he thought, would take up so much land on the other side of the world that if he went west instead of east, he would only need to sail about 2,500 or 3,000 miles. If you have studied your geography carefully, you will see what a mistake he made. It is really about 12,000 miles from Spain to China, or Cathay as he called it, but America is just about 3,000 miles from Spain. And if you read all this story, you will see how Columbus's mistake really helped him to discover America. I have told you that Columbus had a longing to do something great from the time when, as a little boy, he had hung around the wharves in Genoa and looked at the ships sailing east and west and talked with the sailors and wished that he could go to sea. Perhaps what he had learned at school, how some men said that the earth was round, and what he had heard on the wharves about the wonders of Cathay set him to thinking and to dreaming that it might be possible for a ship to sail around the world without falling off. At any rate, he kept on thinking and dreaming and longing until at last he began doing. Some of the sailors sent out by Prince Henry of Portugal, of whom I have told you, in their trying to sail around Africa, discovered two groups of islands out in the Atlantic that they called the Azores, or Isles of Hawks, and the Canaries, or Isles of Dogs. When Columbus was in Portugal in 1470, he became acquainted with a young woman whose name was Philippa Perestrello. In 1473, he married her. Now, Philippa's father, before his death, had been governor of Porto Santo, one of the Azores, and Columbus and his wife went off there to live. In the governor's house, Columbus found a lot of charts and maps that told him about parts of the ocean that he had never before seen, and made him feel certain that he was right in saying that if he sailed away to the west, he should find Cathay. At that time, there was an old man who lived in Florence, a city of Italy. His name was Tuscany. He was a great scholar and studied the stars and made maps and was a very wise man. Columbus knew what a wise old scholar Tuscany was, for Florence is not very far from Genoa. So while he was living in the Azores, he wrote to this old scholar asking him what he thought about his idea that a man could sail around the world until he reached the land called the Indies and at last found Cathay. Tuscany wrote to Columbus saying that he believed his idea was the right one, and he said it would be a grand thing to do, if Columbus dared to try it. "Perhaps," he said, "you can find all those splendid things that I know are in Cathay, the great cities with marble bridges, the houses of marble covered with gold, the jewels and the spices and the precious stones, and all the other wonderful and magnificent things. I do not wonder you wish to try," he said, "for if you find Cathay, it will be a wonderful thing for you and for Portugal." That settled it with Columbus, If this wise old scholar said he was right, he must be right. So he left his home in the Azores and went to Portugal. This was 1475, and from that time on, for 17 long years, he was trying to get some king or prince to help him sail to the west to find Cathay. But not one of the people who could have helped him, if they had really wished to, believed in Columbus. As I told you, they said that he was crazy. The King of Portugal, whose name was John, did a very unkind thing. I'm sure you would call it a mean trick. Columbus had gone to him with his story and asked for ships and sailors. The king and his chief men refused to help him, but King John said to himself, "Perhaps there is something in this worth looking after, and if so, perhaps I can have my own people find Cathay and save the money that Columbus will want to keep for himself as his share of what he finds." So one day, he copied off the sailing directions that Columbus had left with him and gave them to one of his own captains without letting Columbus know anything about it. The Portuguese captain sailed away to the west in the direction Columbus had marked down. But a great storm came up and so frightened the sailors that they turned around in a hurry. Then they hunted up Columbus and began to abuse him for getting them into such a scrape. "You might as well expect to find land in the sky," they said, "as in those terrible waters."